Hi everyone, I'm Mayank Kechriwal and I'm going to use this video to walk you through my process of how I'm going to put together a book chapter and get started on the content for the book that I have proposed with Kendall Hunt on generative AI. So just to give a very brief introduction, my proposal on the generative AI book is called Applied Generative Artificial Intelligence for Enterprises, and it's based on classes that I've taught either on generative AI or on similar topics over the years. So here in this folder, you kind of see some examples of courses that I've taught at the University of Southern California for many years now. So initially, before ChatGPT, I used to teach a course called ISE 540, which is Applied Text Analytics. And I stopped teaching this course around 2024, and then I came up with a new course called ISE 547, which is Generative AI. So what I'm going to do here is, the first thing is that I need to first take the syllabus, because that is going to dictate the way that I'm going to structure the book. So I already have a good syllabus over here. This is like the version 3. So let's take a look at this, and you can see over here that it's pretty generic. It doesn't contain specific details on teaching assistants and all of that, because that depends on the semester when I'm teaching the course. And it contains all kinds of things: homework assignments, course projects, all the stuff students need to see. But most importantly, it contains the course schedule, what we're going to cover week by week, what the topics are going to be. And this is really important because it's going to help me determine what my chapter structure is going to be, because this is the order in which I actually taught the content of the course. And so this is also the order in which I would want to write the book. At least I would want the readers to read the book, even though I might write it a little bit out of order. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my syllabus into this chapter called Content. I'm putting this in the outer folder, because this is not associated to any one chapter. So I'll just call this syllabus. And I also have this chapter here called chapters, which is empty. And so this is where I'm going to start curating the content for the chapters that I want. So going into chapters, what I now need to think about is, what is going to be in the first chapter, the second chapter, and so on. Now, fortunately, in the very recent version of this course that just ended last week, actually, we have week 1 here. So this is where we have an intro to course. We have a whole bunch of stuff. These are very long slides, so we don't actually cover all of it. But for the book, I am going to try to be as complete as possible. So one of the things I'm going to try to do is to take this week 1 intro to course PDF and week 1 NLP. So these are the 2 PDFs containing the content of the course. I'm going to copy these and make a chapter called chapter 1, intro NLP. And then I'm going to copy the content here. So this is kind of the raw material on the basis of which I'm going to write the book. Now, the content in these slides, which I'm not really going to open here right now, this is where a lot of the hard work went in over the years and over the months. This is content that I have developed for the class. It's taken many hours. It's taken expertise, obviously, that I hold in this area. And so what I really want to do is to now spend not too much time to try to convert, all of this content, original content, into the book chapter. So what I'm going to show you next is how I can do that without spending a long period of time just writing all of this up into chapters that will be submitted to the publisher. But instead, how do I best leverage the content that I have already built so that the writing part into documents becomes much easier? All right, so now we're ready to start working on our chapters. So here I want to introduce you to a product that we recently built called GRAIL. It's easily accessible through GRAIL.ai. And the product that I will specifically be using today to craft my chapter is called agentic LaTeX. Now, LaTeX we have invented. It's a very old language, that is typesetting language, that is used by computer scientists a lot for writing papers and even entire books. So I have written 5 books before I started writing this book. and they have all been written using LaTeX. So you can see that, I use LaTeX quite a bit. I have a lot of projects. That's why it takes a little bit of time to load for me. But for new users, it's instantaneous. So what I'm going to do is I will first start by creating a new project. I'm going to just start blank over here. And I'll just type in, Kendall Hunt, ISC 547. So I'll give it a title. Now I'll create the project. You can see that this interface comes up. It is slightly intimidating, especially if you've never used an agentic editor like this one. But the way to think about this is that there are 3 panes. On the left-hand side, we have the outline. So these are the different LaTeX files. Here's the file outline, just to give you a sense of what a LaTeX project can look like. It looks like programming language, and so you don't want to deal with this directly. Obviously, some computer scientists do, but we are not going to do that. So we will just go directly to the PDF. So I really want you to only focus on the middle portion. Don't think too much about the left-hand side. It is only, think of it like just a way to handle files. Now the right-hand side should look very familiar. It is basically, like a chatbot, but a critical difference between a normal chatbot and what you see here is that this agent has the ability to directly change the LaTeX and to directly change your PDF. So you can just ask it to do things for you, and you can see the PDF change right in front of your eyes. By the way, I can type into it or I can speak into the microphone, and either way is fine. So I'm going to use the microphone. I'm writing a book project, and so I need you to convert this template for me so that it is divided up into chapters. Let's go for a very plain template. It should be double spaced, regular font, 12-point size. Don't add any fancy formatting. Let's begin. Let's assume that there are about 7 chapters that we will have, and just give them placeholder titles like chapter 1, chapter 2, and so on. So notice how I'm speaking to it very naturally. I'm not really telling it change the LaTeX code to do this or change the LaTeX code over here or add a function over here. I'm not doing any of that. I am just telling it what I want to see. And that is the critical point here. So let's see how well it works. It may not always be perfect, but you can always ask it to refine it, even if not. Okay, so you can see it's working through it. It's telling you what it's going to do. It's telling you what its understanding is. And you can see that it's creating all the new text files. Again, you don't really need to think about this. You don't need to know what this really means. It kind of helps to know a little bit of LaTeX here and there, and you become more and more familiar as you work with LaTeX projects, but you definitely don't need to know too much. Now over here, we got an error. This can happen with LaTeX. But the neat thing over here is that you don't have to solve the error yourself. You can just ask the agent, and the agent will try to correct the error on its own. So let's see if this works now or not. All right, there we go. So it worked. So you can see it's very simple. Your book title, the author name, and then we can see it as a table of contents, and it's kind of understood what I was asking for, and it has the 7 chapters in here. And it's completely blank right now, exactly as I asked it to. Okay, so we are ready to start working on the first chapter. So what I'm going to now do is, I would really like to have different conversations for different chapters. So I'm going to click on this plus button, and a new conversation comes up, a totally blank conversation. If I want to go back to the previous conversation, I can always go back. That is absolutely fine. None of your conversations get removed. So we are now in this new conversation, and this is where I'm going to start working on my chapter 1. So what I'm going to do is I will go to the chapter 1 content, and we put the raw material for this, right? And I'm going to drag and drop this file into the chatbot, just like ChatGPT, right? And now we're ready to start working on chapter 1. What I'm giving you here is a set of my course slides. And on the basis of these slides, I really want to start drafting a narrative for chapter 1. Take a close look at the slides, go slide by slide. Remember that this is a book that is meant for a graduate student audience, and it is an instructional text. So we really want to introduce the key material. We want to be a little bit formal, but we also want to make it interesting, and we want to divide it and structure it into appropriate subsections. So on the basis of what you see in this document, let's start writing chapter 1. All right, so it's ready to start thinking about chapter 1. So let's see what it does. Now, while it's thinking, let me just walk you through some of the other features here that really make this a neat product, which is you can always share, so you can invite collaborators through emails and they can work with you on the project. We found that it's a really neat thing to do because, some I can have, for example, when I write a paper with my student can work on the more technical portions. They share the paper with me, then I go in, I edit. And so this way it's a real collaboration and we can both use the AI. You can also export and copy the project. I will go into this more later. And you can always contact us if you have more feature requests. If you want, you could always just leave it on its own and you can go to something else on a different tab. So this is another thing that we find very useful where we are working on multiple projects at the same time. Sometimes we're dealing with email, we're doing other things while the AI does its work. All right, so we can see that, it's kind of created a lot of material for me actually. So this is double space, so obviously everything looks longer than it really is. But the first chapter is called Introduction to Generative Artificial Intelligence and Language Models. This is exactly how I would have named the introduction based on the week 1 slide. And, it's kind of given me some material here. Now, already I see something I don't like, which is that the chapter 1, it's giving the full title here, and that is kind of, carrying over to the end of the page. So I can say the header of the chapter has the full title inside it, which is making the text span beyond the page. Could you have a running header that is much shorter? Or maybe just make the running header chapter 1. We don't need to put the title of the chapter in the running header. All right, so it's kind of written a lot of the content here, the centrality of text and language. There are applications. There are things I mentioned in my slides like PubGene and customer relation management systems and digital humanities. And so it's not making things up because I'm giving it my slides. Now, over here, it seems like the short version is the Introduction to Generative AI and Language Models. That is still too long. So maybe we can say that, can we make the short version even shorter? For example, to generative AI. So you shouldn't completely trust the large language models and the AI. Obviously, this is your book, so you have to be responsible for it. So let's see if this works or not. And there we go, right? So notice how I can almost talk my way to what I want to do. There's a lot of text in here. So let me now show you how I can do some other more advanced things. And so we will do this in the next segment of the video. Let me just stop here, but this is just kind of a way to show you that how we were able to start with nothing. And in literally in 5 to 10 minutes, we now have pages and pages of writing that we do have to edit. We do have to go through it and check the accuracy, but that is much easier for me to do than for me to write the whole thing on my own. And I will again emphasize that this is not plagiarized material. This is not AI's material. This is my material. I gave the AI my slides, and I told the AI to develop this chapter on the basis of my slides. So the actual work does go into it because I've spent a lot of time on those slides and on the material, but I am now able to reuse that to write this book without spending the same amount of time developing the same material, but just in a different modality. All right, so now let's focus on a few things that really bring out the power of LaTeX. So as you see over here, I have this thing which is kind of like this paragraph. We don't really need to know what the content is, but I would really like to put this in a box because it looks visually more interesting, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on, I can just click on some text and I can mention this in chat. So I'm letting the agent know that I am referring to this part of the chapter. And now I'm going to say, could you put this entire paragraph starting with "we propose" inside a box and then appropriately cite the box and edit the sentence before that accordingly. Also add a good caption for the box. Notice how it was able to do this in just a minute and it already looks much more interesting. If I want, I can make this colored, I can make this more fancy. I'm choosing not to do that right now because I want to keep it clean. You can see over here that it's referencing the box over here as box 1.1. Now, this is one of the really interesting things about LaTeX, which is that it's able to keep track of all the boxes, figures, tables, references, on its own. So you don't have to renumber or relabel anything. The LaTeX does that for you. So let's say I created a box before this box. The LaTeX would automatically change this to box 1.2. Okay, so let's try to do some other interesting things. One of the things we can do with LaTeX is we can also create tables very easily. So for example, over here, I have practical considerations, real world challenges, and I have a bunch of good things over here, but I again think it will look a lot more interesting if we can turn this into a table. Or I can ask it, can you take a look at the practical considerations section in chapter 1 and express some of the content as a table? Just add a paragraph in the section that references the table and presents an introduction to the challenges, but then put the actual challenges inside a table. All right, so we can see over here, it says table 1.1 summarizes the major categories of challenges. And then, it put the table over here, right? All right, so after spending about an hour or two on this, I'm ready with the first chapter. Notice here how I've asked the LaTeX to put in the title of the book as well as the author. Another really cool thing is that as I write and edit, the GRAIL editor is able to automatically fill in the table of contents. I don't have to do any of this myself, and it updates the page numbers as I keep writing and editing. Another thing I was able to do was to add references to this book fairly easily. GRAIL is able to generate references for me, and we have a very low rate of hallucination. So even though we do have to check the references for safety's sake, it is able to really help me to figure out what the key references are that I want to put in here. I use GRAIL to generate timeline figures like these, where I'm showing what happened in neural networks and large language models in the last 50 years. And I was able to generate this figure simply by prompting GRAIL and describing kind of what I wanted in the figure. Moving on to show a few other things, I was able to ask GRAIL to put examples in boxes. I was able to refine the headers. And a key advantage of LaTeX is that it's able to render equations much more neatly and it's much easier to do that than in Word. There's even a table that we put in, which is right over here. So it's not just a chapter that's full of text, like what you might get if you just prompted ChatGPT, but it's clean with visual artifacts with a figure, a table, and different boxes. I was even able to get GRAIL to create a plan for this book. I did this by giving it the syllabus and then asking it to create a chapter plan and to create the titles of the chapters and to put in a brief introduction on each chapter. And then last but not least, based on my weekly lecture notes as well as the material that is over here, I asked GRAIL to create exercises. And then I went to the exercises and I edited them lightly. But overall, in less than 2 hours, I was able to complete a 32-page chapter with exercises and also with references. After the book is complete, it's also very easy to add indexes to the book. It can be done with very simple commands, and GRAIL can also help you to do that very quickly. So I'll stop here, but I plan to write much of the book using GRAIL, and I really expect it to take a very short amount of time compared to how much time it took me to prepare the material for class.